If a council tells you that you have to wait until the bailiff comes when you're being evicted before they can help, then there is a good chance you can actually get compensation for that. That is a failing, it's maladministration, and it's maladministration that causes injustice in many cases. And so I thought I'd just do a quick video about how it is you claim compensation and what it is you need to look out for in order to basically enforce your rights. And I'll delve into the law a little bit, but not too much. I've done separate videos on the channel about it, so if you want to know more about the nitty-gritty of it, if you just search for the word bailiff on the channel, you get a couple of videos that go into more detail, but I will kind of give a bit of detail about it in this video. And in order to explain this as best I can, I'll give a hypothetical example. So I'm recording this on the 4th of June 2025. Let's say I was in private rented accommodation and my rental period ran from the 1st to the last day of the month, so from the 1st of June to the 30th of June. And let's say my landlord had served a valid Section 21 notice, which meant that my 2-month notice period would expire on the 31st of July. Now, an important point to make about this is that you actually can't make a homeless application until you're within 56 days of it being likely you'll become homeless. So if you think about it, 56 days is 2 lots of 28 days, but months, calendar months, are either 30 or 31 days except February. And what that means is, technically speaking, you need to wait a few days from getting the valid notice to actually making a homeless application. Now, that's not to say don't go to the council before that, because they can actually be very helpful at that point, but that's kind of the way the law would work. So when you're within 56 days of that valid notice expiring, you're threatened with homelessness, and if you're also eligible for assistance, which roughly means having recourse to public funds, you're basically going to be owed the prevention duty. Now, there's many things that the council can do in the prevention duty. They'll do a personalised housing plan, among other things. They can support you to basically find alternative accommodation in the prevention period. It's open to them to do that, but they don't have to. And what they really should do, if they're sensible, is they should be quickly making contact with the landlord to see if the landlord can't be, kind of coerced or persuaded, let's say, to keep the tenants and actually basically cancel the eviction altogether. And some councils, it seems, do give thousands of pounds worth of incentives to landlords in order for them to rescind these notices and kind of keep that tenant. Lots of problems kind of arise from that, but that's how much it's worth to them. I mean, it creates a whole sector where, it's kind of in the landlord's interest to serve a notice so that the council then pay the money. But anyway, so let's say, nothing really happens in that first month or the first 2 months. So we're now getting on to the end of July. The council has not been able to persuade the landlord to change their mind, and they're kind of, they're convinced, they're satisfied that the actual landlord is going to pursue the eviction. So then the notice expires on the 31st of July. So let's say it's now the 1st of August. At this point in time, in most situations, I will legally be homeless, and that has two important implications. One is that the relief duty will basically spring out of the prevention duty. Sorry to use that kind of language, but that's kind of what happens. So the prevention duty, because I was threatened with homelessness, should now morph into the relief duty because I am now legally homeless. Yes, I've got a right to occupy the accommodation, but that does not mean to say it's reasonable to continue to occupy for me. So that's kind of an important point to make. The council should tell you you have a right to occupy right up until the bailiff comes, but they should also tell you in the same breath that you might incur court costs if you were to remain there. And what they can't say is, we cannot help you until the bailiff comes, but that's very widespread. Lots of councils do it. There's not a great risk they'll ever get caught, as I explained in the video earlier this week. And so lots of councils will basically say to you, you have to wait until the bailiff comes. There's nothing we can possibly do until then. That's definitely a lie. And effectively, the closer you get down the eviction process, there's a number of kind of stepping stones to get to the point where the bailiff's coming. It becomes less and less likely that it's reasonable to continue to occupy. Yes, you can occupy, but it's not reasonable to continue to occupy because of the, as I say, court costs and just kind of the general uncertainty that's going to cause, I think. So that's a quick whistle-stop tour of the law. There is more to it. There are other considerations the council can take into account, things like their own resources. That is a legitimate thing they can look at, but they also have to look at things like the wishes of the applicant. Now, if you want to stay in your accommodation right up until the last minute, and some people will, that's fine. You can do that. Yes, you might be incurring court costs, which is, £300 or £400. There is a very small chance, but I guess I would say it, that in some cases, I've never seen it myself, but I've been told by competent people that in some cases a landlord might instruct a barrister to basically, kind of help with the eviction process, at which point you might be liable for thousands of pounds worth in terms of court fees and kind of the cost of the defence, whatever. I'm using the wrong terminology there, but that's kind of the upshot of it. So there is that kind of small but significant risk that could also happen. So as I say, one of the important things that happens is the relief duty springs out of the prevention duty. The other thing that can happen at this point is the Section 188 interim accommodation duty, the emergency accommodation duty would spring up if there is reason to believe that you might be homeless, you might be eligible, and you might have a priority need. So bearing in mind, if it has gone from prevention to relief, the council is in fact satisfied that you are homeless and you are eligible. So those are the first two kind of criteria taken care of at Section 188. If there is also reason to believe that you might be in priority needs, then the council should be offering you interim accommodation at that point. So potentially on the 1st of August or even 31st of July, I'm not quite sure what point actually happens, but the day after the notice is expired, the council should be offering you interim accommodation in most cases where there is reason to believe you might be in priority need. So if we now return back to this question of how you get compensation, basically if you have gone to a council and they've told you they can't do anything until the bailiff comes, you've got a good chance that you've got a worthy complaint to be putting off there, because in effect that sounds very much like a blanket approach. It sounds to me like in that situation that the council has not actually genuinely looked at your wishes, they've not looked at the wider circumstances, and in effect they haven't given a coherent rationale for telling you that they can't help. So I think the first thing to understand about making a complaint here is that you don't need to understand the ins and outs of the law. You can find the ins and outs of the law within the Homelessness Code of Guidance, which is freely available. You just got to Google it. And if you start at paragraph, I think it's 6.29 or 6.31 or something, that's when it starts talking about the issue. When you start getting to 6.35 onwards, that's when it starts getting increasingly clear what the actual law is and at what point the council need to step in. But as I say, there are some criteria that need to be satisfied and there are some nuances to it. But if a housing officer's told you they can't help until the bailiff comes, you have to stay put. As I say, there is a good chance that you've got a legitimate complaint there, and in which case you just need to start the complaints process really as soon as possible. There again, there's some nuance around that, but let's say for the sake of argument you're definitely going to be in priority need. So you've got kids, or you've got a pregnant woman in the household, or you're vulnerable or something like that. Then that's when it's kind of worth complaining earlier. You might say that it's actually worth waiting a little bit until a bit further down the line to actually make the complaint. Certainly when I worked at Just Us in Bedford, we would basically wait as late as possible because we didn't want any retaliatory action from the housing officers in the meantime, and that might seem very cynical. That's something I witnessed when I worked in Bedford Borough Council back in the day. So it can happen. So as I say, generally speaking, you want to wait as late as you can to make the complaint. But in situations where there's some urgency, like potentially this one, it might be worth making a complaint earlier. Certainly when the council's definitely going to have a duty to house you. So let's say, as I say, you're in priority need automatically, you're not intentionally homeless and so on, local connections taken care of. In that situation, there's not a lot to lose by making a complaint much earlier. And bear in mind there is a time limit on making complaints, so you have to get to the LGSCO, the Local Government Social Care Ombudsman, which means you have to be able to get through the council's complaints process in accordance with their timelines and then get to the LGSCO within 12 months of becoming aware of the issue. Again, there's a little bit more even to that kind of stuff, but that's kind of general kind of things. So just check out the video I did about the best way to make a complaint to sort of see a bit more detail about that. But yeah, your complaint, really, first stage complaint, if it was me, I'd send it to the chief exec, I'd copy in the relevant councillors, and my complaint would probably be 1 paragraph long. In fact, I might even put a suggested template of what the wording you can use would be in the description of the video, which you can kind of amend and kind of tweak or whatever. But effectively your complaint needs to say something like, Dear Council, I made a homeless application on this date, my notice expired on this date, it was valid, the landlord was not up for changing their mind, and the council housing officer told me that there was nothing the council could do right up until the bailiff comes. That's basically your complaint. It would go to the first stage response. First stage response would almost certainly basically not uphold it. They'd say, oh, yeah, we're fine, there's nothing, we've done nothing wrong, all that sort of stuff. That's very normal for a first stage complaint. That's just the way it works, really, in my experience. Go to stage 2. Stage 2, you've got a better chance of having a reasonable outcome from it, because at that point the council should be thinking, okay, let's just treat this seriously now, we don't want it to go to the LGSCO. I say stage 2 because some councils actually have a third stage as well, but most councils I deal with have only had a 2-stage complaints process. Once you've got the second stage complaint response, if you're not happy with it, and I'd say by happy with it I mean the council should really be offering you something like £500 compensation for the distress and inconvenience caused by the bad advice, and potentially also court costs if relevant. So if you actually go and get evicted, you have to go to court and there are fees. then that is something the LGSCO is likely to recommend that the council pay. So I'll put a pretty vanilla example of this from Thurrock. Again, I'm not picking on Thurrock, there just happened to be one I saw recently where they gave £500 plus the, I think, £400 court cost or whatever it was. That was the remedy. So that's just a good indicator of how it works. But the key thing the LGSCO will be looking at when you get that far is they'll be looking at, is there anything within the council's records where the council gave their rationale for telling you to wait longer, basically, because it can happen. As I say, there will be nuance to it. There might be some situations where it would be reasonable for a council to say, no, we're not going to help yet, we're going to help further down the line. But in most cases, and by most I mean more than 50%, there would be no rationale, basically. There would be no coherent rationale, let's say, for doing that. And what the LGSCO will want to look at straight away, it seems, is they want to look at, where did the council consider this? What information did they consider? Was it a coherent position to take? And if it wasn't, then it's likely the complaint will be upheld, and it's likely, it seems to me, based on the decisions I've read, that you're going to be looking at sort of £900 compensation. Now that's not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things, and I guess the important thing to understand here is that that process probably takes between 6 and 9 months, best case scenario, to actually get a resolution. In the meantime, you've had to go through the court, you've had to kind of go through all that stress of getting evicted, so it's not going to sort out the problem in most cases early on, although it can do. It could potentially do it if the council were on the ball about it. It may well be that if you are getting that advice and you want to challenge it at the time, you need to get a solicitor and you need to go down the judicial review route. But the other thing with all this complaining, what it does is that it potentially improves the system a little bit for the next people coming after you. And it might be a very, incalculably small increment that it improves things. But in my mind, and I'm happy to kind of get challenged on this, but in my mind, homelessness won't be ended until housing supply is sufficiently dealt with. And the government is not going to sufficiently deal with housing supply until there is a political reason to do that. So as long as people basically get told nonsense about having to wait until the bailiff comes, as long as they don't do anything about it, nothing will change. But if more and more people, more and more tenants, more and more members of the public, more and more citizens challenge councils, challenge all the things that we see every day in councils, then that is going to add to the pressure for the government to do something. And without kind of getting the tinfoil hat on too much, we don't know what's going to happen with AI. AI is going to disrupt society a lot. We don't know what it'll do to the job market. We don't know what it'll do to different professions and all kind of careers that go with it. But one thing I would say that it is pretty clear to me anyway, that's how I see it, is that one of the things we could really be doing right now is we can be equipping and kind of hopefully inspiring people, citizens, to challenge the council and act politically when things are going wrong. Because £900, as I say, not a great deal of money if you've had to go through all the stress and kind of all the expense of being homeless and so on. It's not going to make up for it. But if people get better and better at challenging councils who break the law, then that is going to do something about the overall situation, in my opinion. So it is worth doing for that reason as well. Obviously, Section 21s are no longer going to exist at the end of this year, it seems, because the Renters' Rights Act's coming in at some point. We don't know when. Just to say that doesn't mean to say that there's a deadline there on making a complaint if you've been advised to stay until the bailiff comes, because as I say, you've got 12 months from finding out about the issue. So that could actually leave the possibility of getting compensation open till a year after at least the Renters' Rights Act come in and Section 21 cease to exist. Part of the reason I do this channel is to tell people what their rights are, I guess, and try and encourage people to go and use their rights and fight for their rights, basically defend their rights. And yes, Section 21 is a transient issue, it's not going to exist in a few years' time, but that ability to act politically, and I don't mean Conservative or Labour politically, but the act of kind of acting as a citizen, making use of the democratic systems that are in place, the complaints process being one of them, that is going to basically be good for the health of our country. To have more and more citizens to basically know what their rights are and have experience and having challenged their council before, I think is a good thing for the country, basically. So, as I say, sorry to go off on a bit of a tangent there, but yeah, hopefully there's some information in there which is going to be useful. If you've got any questions about it, do put questions in the comments, anonymise them, don't ask them in the first person. Just ask them as a what-if question, you get exactly the same answer, but you don't have to put your personal data on the internet to get it. That's another thing about citizens' rights, by the way, that's another thing I keep going on about it. So yeah, and we'll basically, if I can't answer it straight away, I'll take you to the next live stream. Speaking of which, they're every Thursday night, most Thursday nights, sometimes a Wednesday actually, 7:30 PM. You don't have to watch it live. If you ask a question in the comments and it's anonymised and it makes sense, I'll take you to the next live stream. You can then watch it live or watch the recording. and it gives us space to kind of give that bit more nuance in terms of the answers, because homelessness law unfortunately is not very straightforward a lot of the time. So it helps for us, when I say us, me, Shannon, Will and Caris, to basically unpack things a little bit, verbally, basically, and give space for the actual answer. So do make use of that, and I hope this has been useful. Yeah, as I say, check out the description. I'll put a template wording paragraph for a complaint. It doesn't need to be very complicated. Just keep it nice and short and factual. That's part of what makes a good complaint anyway. And I think, as I say, there's a good chance you may be able to get a bit of compensation if that's what the council's done.